over to Dmytro Shymkiv, Deputy Head of the Presidential Administration, who will tell us about the current state of reforms and about what we should expect in this sphere. Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to greet everybody, and I have several parts of my presentation. I'd like to talk about the priorities, 18 priorities, and there are targeted reform teams, and a minister is responsible for each of those reforms, or a representative of the responsible committees of the parliament or other bodies of state authority. So these target teams have been set up, sometimes with a delay, but they are created, they have been created, and we have launched the site reforms.in.ua. It is in the beta format so far, and as you see, there are all the priority reforms. Let's enter the site. And for instance, the state administration reform, you'll be able to see who is responsible politically. Hennady Zubko is politically responsible. Then the description of the reform, how it is done in the coalition agreement, then about the activity of the government. At the moment, we're working on timetable, on schedule, and you can see the documents that relate to this. For instance, the draft law on state service, public service, and the composition of the target teams. You see who are members of those teams, and also the internal norms according to which they are working in different ministries and departments, agencies. In particular, the main aim of the site is to get as much information from all the teams that are working and to collect it in one single place, and also to launch the balance scorecard. And according to the decision of the National Council for Reforms, and with the support of the European Union and public organizations, New Ukraine and Reanimation Package of Reforms, the balance sheets are worked out that allow us to follow the course of the reforms, whether we are fulfilling the targets or not, and we are result-oriented. Reform is not a process, this is a project that has clear-cut time frames, and as the time flows until the end of this week, probably by the beginning of the next week, we will present 5 first priority cases. Some teams are faster, some teams are slower, but with the help of experts and public, we can formulate indicators. The balance scorecards will be agreed with those who are responsible for reforms. Everything will be public and accessible practically online. We are renewing the site non-stop. Well, some other things. Here you can also find all the information about the National Council of Reforms, its composition and its meetings. And if we have a look at any of the sittings, you see the minutes of the procedure and all the presentation materials that were or will be delivered during those meetings. Besides, we also have the status of the fulfillment of decisions. You can see that we have a lot of decisions and resolutions adopted by the National Council of Reforms. We have their status, we have people responsible and the time frame when they should be fulfilled, and we follow whether they are fulfilled or not. We monitor this. Coming back to the main page, here you can see, and yesterday we have published the agenda of Ukraine and EU. We have coordinated all the points according to which the reforms run. You see Strategy 2020 here and the coalition agreement and the action program for the Cabinet of Ministers and the restoration plan for the country. And as I call it, the backbone of the entire reform and the agreement on association between Ukraine and the EU-Ukraine action agenda that discusses specific projects in more detail, and they will soon appear as well, and the projects which are part of the association agreement, also the memorandum IMF Ukraine, where we see the key elements that influence the formation of the country, and you can also see the plan that's in gray. This is the growth plan for 2017-2020, because we see that the next 3 years for us are going to be stabilization years. We have to pull back the state of the country to the level from which we can start the growth or the plan of reforms. The key indicators are also here. If you enter here, you can see the indicators to compare with other countries on specific issues and directions. We're trying to support the news service, and there's also the notion of initiatives and ideas that have more coverage than focused reforming. For instance, the digital initiative, Digital Ukraine, and you see that here is one of the new elements that I should mention today, a draft law or an initiative about cloud technologies in state bodies of power, about the use of them. And before I switch over to this initiative, I would like to tell you a bit about important draft laws that pertain to reforming in several directions. I'd like to mention here 2150 and 2151 legislative initiatives that were worked out by activists and MPs, and the new management of the Public Health Ministry, which has as its chief aim the simplification of the procedure of the purchase of medicines and medical goods from specialized organizations, with the involvement of those organizations like the International Dispensary Association, the Crown Agency of the UK, and the Global Drug Facility, and also the Partnership for the Supply and Medicine.
Those legislative initiatives were mentioned by the President of Ukraine of prime importance, and this week they will be considered, and I hope they will be voted and approved in the first reading. As a result, I would like to thank all parties of the discussion, because we found a compromise. That's a big result of work of activists, deputies, and new leadership of the Ministry of Healthcare. In addition to that, at the last meeting of the National Council of Reforms, we made a decision to hold to hold procurements in all the ministries in electronic format. We'll keep a track of developments, whether the ministries are using that. During the next meeting of the Council, we will inform whether all the ministries started to use the system. Coming back to the initiative of Digital Ukraine, we have several draft laws and several initiatives. The first one is 2771, 2772, draft laws about open data. That's an opportunity to publish open data from different registers openly that allows to develop the systems, and that's about budgets, local budgets, and the implementation. And as we know, such information is published in the format of in PDF. It's like a document. It's like electronic printout, and according to this draft law, we would like to see them in the format of data. It's very different. Analytical systems could use them in the mode of electronic e-tables and to analyze the data quicker, because to transfer all those paper tables into electronic, that takes a lot of time for any agency. Also, draft 2999 about e-requests of citizens and e-petitions. If we go to, for example, to this initiative, we can find here a document which gives details about the draft law. In addition to that, as I told you, I'd like to announce that yesterday we placed on the site for a discussion an initiative on using the system of calculations, and that could be used by the state authorities. What do I mean? Today, cloud technologies allow to introduce electronic services, but in the majority of the cases, such services outside of Ukraine, and they must be certified. They must be certified by Ukrainian services if it is used by public institutions, and also it should meet international standards. In addition to that, we would like to see that that technology is accessible to Ukrainian public servants, especially for rapid development. When you wanted to develop a decision, when you have all the powers, so using such technologies means you don't need to waste a lot of money and energy, etc. One of the countries said that actually using is government cloud, that is the UK. During in 2011-2012, they saved 316 million pounds. At Mexico, because of cloud technologies, they used the system of VAT. That's a problem for us. They saved 150 to 200 million dollars. Also, I'd like to mention there's an initiative of the Parliament. The Speaker, Grossman, has to the list of draft laws that is in the process of reforms for a long time. Draft law was developed by that list. Is discussed in the Parliament, and they discuss in details legislation to be passed, and that legislation is in committees in factions, so they said on time and time frame, etc. And in the end, as about the reform of public service, on March 13, in the Cabinet Minister, there was a discussion around the draft law, and Representatives NGOs and international experts were invited, and according to the decision, the draft law might be discussed at the Government Committee and brought to the Parliament by March 19. That was the decision. I know the issue of reform in public service is very important, and there are a lot of questions about that. With this is a small digest, but the most important, I would like to say that the site is in better mode, and we considered 6 different designs, and finally we found one of them, which was like in British government, very simple, and we hope that this website will develop. And I hope that you will get maximum of information from that website. It is updated daily, depending on new information we receive from focus groups.
My question is about the safety. And do I understand correctly that this data will be stored beyond the borders of Ukraine? Thank you for the question. The safety issue is also raised by international institutions, and there are international certifications of such centers of data processing. If we look at those that's been created and are serviced by Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and these are the 3 major providers of data centers in the European Union, they correspond to certain international standards. We do not introduce to the project a link to certain standards, but to those that are being used in the European community. These standards allow to store the data on servers that are in agencies and ministries, but if we do want to very quickly introduce an information decision or a collection of data, or, well, any technological decision for quick implementation for certain tasks, the safety issue is very critical. There are international auditing companies that conduct audits of those in data processing centers, and in many countries there are laws that do allow to use the cloud technology for all the open data, but everything that pertains to private and classified information, they should not be stored on private service, on public service. How do you think, which body of state authority will be the first to discard any paper carriers, and what's impeding you, because you hoped to finish this cycle even before the end of 2014. So what are the barriers? Bureaucracy, sabotage, or maybe some legal norms? If we talk about the bodies of power that use electronic documentation to this or that extent, this is, for instance, the administration of the president, the Ministry of Economy, partially the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers. I'd like to emphasize that at the moment we do use paper carriers only for what is confidential or state secret, and also for what is for this service use. All the rest is in soft copies, and it is not replicated on paper, with the exception of what I'll tell you now. In any case, the reasons when there's non-acceptance of the use of electronic documentation, there's a rule I'll call it generational cultural reasons, because there are different people who differently treat electronic devices. However, they do use computer technology in their everyday life and right to their near and dear. However, when they meet electronic technology in their operational activity, they are rather resistant to such changes. Everything begins with the classical change management, and this is the process when you explain, when you teach, when you demonstrate and get feedback. I'd like to emphasize that the system of electronic documentation in the administration of the president is constantly being developed, approximately as the site is. We are listening to the feedback from users, the workers of the administration, and we want to become more functional. This is all being done practically live. We have part of the people who are active users. I'd like to underline that these are people who have worked in the state or public service. That's why you should not say that all the state servants or public servants are enemies, are opposed to the use of electronic system. There are different likes and dislikes, different understanding. We are convincing them, we are working them, or we are praising them in public, those who actively use this. In addition, we do explain how to work with this, and besides, we are now talking to other ministers who saw how this works in the president's administration and who can tell us how we can scale up this to other bodies of power. Of course, there are some normative acts that do limit the use of electronic documents. For instance, this entire story about electronic signature, but this does not ban us from using electronic documentation within an organization without any digital signatures, because we understand who uses the system, how they use it, and we see the resources that are being used by the workers. This is not just electronic documentation, this is the system of gleaning information, processing it. These are search system. This is much more than just a documentation turnover. Have you calculated how much the administration of the president has saved because of the rejection of paper? Yeah, you know, we have calculated at the very start the volume of print. Yes, we had some figures. I can't quote them now. We don't pay too much attention to this. The priority at the moment is to make the system work so that the people use it. But the major saving here is time. The time since the document enters the administration of the president in a paper form and until it gets to the person who works with the document, and we adopt decisions, and you know, this all is the time that can be cut. Besides, we have daily reports about how many documents are processed immediately, how many within 3 days, how many within 10 days, and we know who are our leaders, we know who is lagging behind, we meet those who lag behind, we explain them, we find out the reason for the slowing down. And I also have a question about the draft law on public service. And there was an agreement that if it is not tabled by the cabinet of ministers, then MPs will table it. But even in 2014, you said that this is a package of laws, and there should be an instrument of stimulating the public servants. What is the stage this idea is now at? Thank you. Yes, true. In autumn, we were talking about the draft law on secondment of business people to the state service. We were talking about a fund to compensate for losses there, but this draft law has got a lot of criticism from the international community in the part of additional payment through the foundation. to certain people from business. However, you have people who are already working today in the state service, and this is no equality, this is the breach of equality. Now we're working on a much broader platform together with the European community, but you should understand, first of all, that when we have a crisis in the country, an economic crisis, to create some separate strata of the population for whom special conditions for salarying is created is probably unfeasible. But we understand that for changes to take place in many agencies and ministries, there should come people who understand what is management, what is change management, and also to get a dignified salary. At the same time, they should be open to those who are active workers and have been working in the bodies of power for a long time. Thank you, Dmytro. We expect that you'll be here back in 2 weeks with your report, and